You know how it is, you get hooked on something, start seeing all these layers and hidden meanings, and you just want to know what's really going on underneath it all. We get it.
Absolutely. You bring that curious mind and we'll plunge right into the heart of it, looking closely at the sources so you come away truly understanding what's important without spending hours doing it yourself.
And today we're diving deep into the behind the scenes of an episode that has definitely sparked a ton of that kind of curiosity and some pretty wild fan theories too.
Oh, yeah? Which one?
The community gem, remedial chaos theory. And we've got a fantastic source to guide us, a blog post straight from the show's creator, Dan Harmon himself.
Ah, okay. That's perfect. And what's interesting there is that Harmon isn't just like reminiscing. He's specifically tackling a fan theory that's really taken hold, right?
That's exactly it. If you're a community fan, you've probably heard the chatter about the order, the broadcast order of remedial chaos theory, and another episode, competitive ecology.
Right, the swap.
Yeah, the swap. And the fan theory that popped up was seriously compelling. It suggested a deliberate narrative link tied into all those branching timelines we saw in remedial chaos theory.
Okay, I remember this one.
So, our mission today, thanks to Harmon's own words, is to get to the bottom of what really happened. Okay, let's unpack this whole timeline. Or maybe timeline confusion is a better word.
Yeah, let's dive straight into that fan theory first, because it really shows how much the audience was digging into the show's cleverness.
Totally.
So the core idea was that competitive ecology, which aired, shortly after remedial chaos theory?
Yeah, episode 4, I think, instead of 3.
Right. The theory was that it wasn't supposed to air then.
Yeah.
That it actually showed a reality that branched off from remedial chaos theory.
Specifically the one where a bed gets the pizza. Right.
Exactly, where a bed catches the die and intercepts the pizza delivery. That was the theory, that competitive ecology was taking place in that specific timeline.
It just shows how closely people were watching remedial chaos theory, with all those realities spinning out from one roll of the die.
No kidding.
And the idea that another seemingly normal episode was secretly a continuation of one specific alternate timeline. I mean, that's the kind of theory that really gets you thinking.
It is, and it sounds like Dan Harmon definitely heard about this interpretation.
Oh, he did. And it's quite clear from his blog post, he felt a real need to address it directly. He says he wanted to be on record firmly denying it.
Firmly is a good word for it. He doesn't mince words at all. He just comes right out with, it's just not true.
Yeah. You can really feel him wanting to set the record straight.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was so important for him to be that direct about it?
That's a good question. I think maybe he felt it kind of misrepresented the creative intention behind both episodes. Mm-hmm. Or, like he mentions, maybe he was worried that the swapped order accidentally created this false signal of hidden complexity. Like, people were seeing intent where there wasn't any.
Right. Like, he was worried people were hunting for some elaborate, planned Easter egg, some secret narrative thread.
When the reality was much more, practical, grounded in just getting the show made on time.
Okay, so if it wasn't a clever timeline trick, what was the actual reason competitive ecology aired before remedial chaos theory?
Well, according to Harmon, the main driver was just how incredibly difficult the post-production was for remedial chaos theory.
Ah, the editing.
Exactly. He points out its production code, 303, signifying it was the third episode written, third one filmed, and yet the one they fully intended to air third.
And he even mentions that Troy in Abed's apartment number was 303 as a nod to that, right?
Yeah. A cool little detail that underlines the original plan.
So it was all set to be episode 3. What went wrong? Or, what caused the change?
Well, Harmon really paints a picture of a struggle in the edit bay. He calls remedial chaos theory his words, a bitch to edit.
Oof.
But on the other hand, competitive ecology was apparently much smoother. He described it as relatively easy to write, shoot, and edit.
You can almost feel the pressure reading his account. He talks about the looming delivery deadline for 303.
Yeah, and feeling like it was nowhere near complete. He gives a lot of credit to Chris McKenna for the script too, and felt this huge pressure to, do it justice in the final cut.
So the clock's ticking.
Right. And then Harmon sees an early cut of competitive ecology from the director and realizes it's in fantastic shape. He says it was just 6 hours from being broadcastable.
Wow, that close.
Meanwhile, remedial chaos theory still needed. Well, who knew how much more work in editing? It was uncertain.
So, facing that deadline, Harmon made the call. Swap them.
Exactly. And this is crucial, something he really emphasizes. This wasn't NBC telling him what to do.
Right. He owned the decision.
Yeah, he explicitly says he ordered the swap and then had to actually talk them NBC into it.
So it was driven purely by needing to get a quality episode out the door while they kept wrestling with the complexity of remedial chaos theory.
Precisely. It really pulls back the curtain on how these decisions sometimes get made, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It reminds you that what we see as viewers, maybe interpreting as some grand narrative choice, can actually just be the result of practical logistical stuff happening behind the scenes.
Makes you wonder how many other things we assume are deliberate creative choices actually have origins like that.
Definitely. And it's interesting, too, that even in that scramble, they were still thinking about other potential continuity things. Harmon mentions the whole Eartha Kitt contradiction issue in episode 304, the one that aired right after Competitive Ecology.
Oh, yeah, the running gag with Pierce misremembering who said that quote.
And apparently some execs suggested just cutting that line to avoid any continuity blips caused by the Srunk.
Which shows they were paying attention to detail, just and maybe not in the way the fan theory imagined, not timeline branching detail, but episode to episode consistency.
Exactly. And Harmon's reason for keeping the Eartha Kitt bit is pretty insightful. He felt like it set up Pierce's character trait, the constant misremembering. It became a funny, consistent thing for him.
That makes sense. He also touches on the marijuana lighter as another potential continuity thing they thought about.
Right, but he figured it wasn't a big deal because Shirley, being Shirley, probably already knew about Britta's past anyway.
Yeah, she's observant. These little peeks into their internal logic about what counts as a continuity break and what doesn't are pretty fascinating.
But even with all that, Harmon does admit there was an unintended downside to the swap.
What was that?
He points out that it meant 2 more normal episodes, as he calls them, aired back to back, and both of them had that Chang as a security guard B storyline.
Oh, right. You can kind of sense a bit of regret there in his writing. He seemed worried that particular sequence airing 301, then 302, then 304, then 305, before 303.
Yeah.
He worried it might have given viewers a kind of skewed or maybe even negative first impression of season 3 overall. Like, people might have made judgments too early based on that altered flow.
That highlights how much the order you see things in can really shape your perception of a season's direction. Even small shifts matter.
It's a good reminder. Okay, so let's circle back to the core of that fan theory, the timelines. Because Harmon specifically addresses what he considers the real or prime timeline within remedial chaos theory itself.
Right. He defines it. How does he frame that?
Well, he connects it back to the episode structure. The prime timeline, in his view, is the central one that those Duncan Brothers transition scenes were designed to highlight.
Yes. Those surreal little bits with Duncan in a bed watching the different realities unfold.
Exactly. And that prime timeline, just to refresh everyone's memory.
That's the one where a bed catches the die.
Yep. Jeff doesn't volunteer to get the pizza, revealing his selfishness.
And the group ultimately decides, okay, Jeff, you go get the pizza. That's the main reality.
That's the one. That's the foundation, according to Harmon, that all the other chaotic timelines branch from. His intention was always to clearly signal within the episode itself when they were deviating from that central track.
So the different die rolls, the different outcomes, they were meant to be explicitly shown as alternate realities within that single episode.
Correct. Not secretly bleeding into later episodes without any signal.
Which really leads into Harmon's broader philosophy about storytelling, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole relationship between a creator and the audience, he seems to really dislike intentionally misleading people.
Yeah, he calls it parlor tricks. He has a strong aversion to it. This is a really key insight into how he thinks creatively.
He uses that example from The Killing, right? The discovery of a body that turned out to be misleading.
Exactly. To illustrate the kind of storytelling he doesn't like, where the deception doesn't really serve a deeper narrative purpose, it just kind of manipulates the audience.
And then he contrasts that with Silence of the Lambs.
Right, where the SWAT team being at the wrong house while Clarice is at the real killer's door actually builds suspense.
Yeah.
And it empowers the audience because we know something the character doesn't.
For Harmon, it sounds like any deception has to have a clear, justifiable narrative payoff. It can't just be a trick.
And what really stands out is his focus on audience trust. He says quite plainly, "We never want to confuse you or lie to you. We just don't consider that a right that we have."
Wow. That says a lot about his approach, his respect for the viewers.
It really does. It's about being clear with your intentions as a storyteller.
Okay, so Harmon lays out the practical reasons, debunks the theory, explains his philosophy. But the concept of remedial chaos theory, those alternate realities, it does naturally make fans wonder, right? Questions linger.
Oh, absolutely. And Harmon acknowledges that. Questions like, is timeline one real? The darkest timeline. Or is evil Abed still out there somewhere?
Those are logical questions that spring right out of the episode's premise.
For sure. And Harmon's take is interesting. He doesn't just brush them off as fans reading too much into it.
What does he say?
He calls them really, really good questions that I think only a really, really good show would answer.
Huh. So it leaves the door open almost. A sense that maybe those are ideas worth exploring later.
It seems that way. It touches on that whole idea in ongoing stories. How much do you wrap up neatly and how much do you leave open for speculation? Harmon seems to appreciate letting some threads dangle as long as the original storytelling was honest.
Keeps the conversation going, that's for sure. And speaking of what's next, Harmon does wrap up his post with a little tease, doesn't he? Mentions an upcoming Halloween episode he was excited about.
Yeah, and it's clear he was really happy with how much fans loved remedial chaos theory. He even hints he might share some behind the scenes stuff down the road.
Like what?
Like whiteboard photos from when they were breaking the story for the episode. And even a text message exchange that apparently sparked the whole initial idea.
Oh, well, that's gold for fans. Those little glimpses into the creative process.
Totally. That's the stuff that deepens your appreciation for how these things actually get made.
Absolutely. Okay, so bringing it all together then. Our deep dive into Dan Harmon's blog post pretty much settles it. The out-of-order airing of remedial chaos theory and competitive ecology.
Not some elaborate timeline puzzle.
No. It was fundamentally about practical production headaches, specifically the intense post-production work needed for remedial chaos theory.
Exactly. The fan theory was clever, showed real engagement, but it just wasn't the reality behind the decision. And Harmon's commitment to being clear with his audience, not playing tricks, really comes through.
It really makes you think, though. You see how much detail and energy goes into just one episode and the amazing theories fans can build around it.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other decisions behind the shows or movies we love, things that seem simple or maybe even deliberate on screen, actually have these complex, maybe less glamorous, practical backstories? It kind of encourages you, the listener, to think about all those layers, the intended meanings, the accidental ones, the production realities that shape everything we watch. There's often way more going on beneath the surface than we first realize.